This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for coming back on Food Trips. And Theodore, it's been great to have you here. The new hosts of the podcast, Forked, Helena and Theodore, for speaking about food policy, and all the effects it has on the United States and our global economy. So thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks for having me on. This is a first for me, so I'm glad to be here.
And Theodore, you are at Fern, briefly. Could you explain just briefly what that is, since you're not technically at Food Fix right now with Helena?
That's right. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Food and Environment Reporting Network, and we are a nonprofit news organization that does journalism, mostly in partnership, on food and the environment.
Great. So this is the dream team to talk about this. So, Helena, I had you on a while back, early on in the administration, to talk about the Make America Healthy Again, MAHA movement, and what policies were we seeing, because there was a lot of wild cards we didn't know. Things have changed since then. You've continued reporting, both of you. I'm curious to hear what's going on. What has changed? Is there any change? Do we have a policy thesis that you can point to? So let me just start there, and we can go.
I was trying to remember when that was. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was on this podcast. Was it right when they took office? So early in the year. We talk a lot about this on the podcast. We're really still waiting for the policy thesis. We're still waiting for the agenda. What is the federal MAHA agenda? The states are going wild. They're banning additives, they're imposing warning labels, including states like Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, states that you wouldn't usually suspect to be going after the food industry in a regulatory way. So the states are going MAHA, they're showing us their cards, but we don't have yet what is the federal agenda going to be. There's a couple of things that they're talking about in the short term, they're going to release the dietary guidelines, which we could talk about in the coming months. Those are going to look a lot different. They're almost certainly going to tell us to eat less ultra-processed foods. They are going to define ultra-processed foods. They just announced that recently. That could suggest that they're going to take further action, but we don't know that yet. And they are they're approving states to restrict SNAP benefits for what you can buy, like sugary drinks or candy in a handful of states. So those are the kind of policies we've seen actually moving. And some of them aren't policies, right? None of those things are regulatory. They don't require going to the Federal Register, which is where people who follow FDA and USDA live. That's where the real rubber meets the road. They're not putting things in the Federal Register. They're not banning things. They're not moving policy yet. And so we're waiting to see all of that. What we are seeing is really strong bad vibes about, RFK Jr. is out there saying, in no uncertain terms, we're being poisoned. Our ultra-processed foods are poisoning us. Sugar is poisoning us. Seed oils are poisoning us. That's being said at a very high level. And that's very new. I don't know, Eric, when you were at FDA, did you hear anyone at the cabinet level or otherwise say things like that? I think sometimes if you haven't been following this, you're not even aware of how big of a change that really is. So rhetoric changed a lot. Policy, TBD. That's my...
I want to add a little bit on to what Helena said. I think policy thesis it's tough to say that there is one, but I do think there is a policy rationale, right? And if you look at everything that Helena just said, I would think if you could sort of all boil it down to the Grover Norquist idea of government, if you can think way back when to the anti-tax policy pledges that Norquist got different politicians to sign. And basically the idea within the food system and within food politics is to make all this government stuff at the federal level so small that you might be able to drown it like a baby in the bathtub. So I think, yes, it's not necessarily rational. It's not necessarily coherent, but it is going in a particular direction. So I always like to get a little Grover Norquist reference into any conversation I'm having. So I've
What
done
is
that.
he up to these days? I don't know.
I think if you read about him, he's actually saying things like, well, not like the whole government. Like, I mean, only one baby, not all the babies in the bathtub.
Oh
So it's
boy.
more like that,
Oh
you know?
boy. Grover
Yeah, and then you
Norquist, fun side note, actually came to my small liberal arts college when I was in college, and I had lunch with him. And he was not a kind person. I will say that. He was quite rude. In fact, he stands out as the rudest speaker I saw during my time. And I saw a real variety on every from every ideological and political perspective. And yeah, well, heard it here first.
So it sounds like I've heard elsewhere. Tell me if this is true or not. That there's sort of the approach is more one, I'll say like vibes based in terms of policy, and two, it's not. There's not a lot of optimism. It's more about, like I said, like going back to your point about poisoning ourselves. It's about the sort of shock of directly confronting the grievances, the bad things that are quote unquote happening to us all, and we need to right them. That is something's very different to me, if true, because when I was at FDA, it was very much a like, what can we do to make lives better, or what is going well, how great are we at what we do, but of course we can improve. It was never sort of, but I don't know. Theodore, like, what do you think? Is it just like we'll go with what we feel like, or do you feel like there's actually just like a set of grievances on a scratched out notepad somewhere?
I think it is grievance based to some degree. I think that's true to some degree, but I think it's also a philosophical severing from conventional thought about what FDA and what food policy could be in this country. So if you come from a point of view in which the government policies, the structures of science and nutrition, all of these actors within the food system are not worthy of trust, right? Then moving them to the side and going in a different direction, whether that's, I mean, it goes into vaccines, but it also goes into health supplements, raw milk, not having kids who are on SNAP drinking soda, all these kinds of debatable and not so debatable things. If you believe that the government can't be trusted to make those things happen, then you do what the MAHA folks are doing. And in some ways, you are creating positive debates, some ways, about these subjects.
And I want to be clear that when I'm talking about vibes, I mean like the communication coming from the government. Like it's the message, the narrative, what is being communicated to the public. It's hard because in the food space, let's set aside vaccines and everything else. I know we can't separate them, but like when we're thinking about food and we're looking at ultra processed foods, for example, okay, I think it's a lot of people would take issue with being like, we're being poisoned, our children are being mass poisoned. Okay, like they take issue with that. However, there is a ton of research that associates higher consumption of ultra processed foods to all manner of poor health outcomes. And we have a chronic disease crisis in this country. I mean, that part is true, right? We are spending massive amounts of healthcare dollars on treating diabetes, obesity, autoimmune condition. I mean, like we do have a health crisis in this country. So it's almost like the problem being identified is there, but then what do you do about it? What are the evidence-based levers that can be pulled to do something about it? And that's, I think, where we're very like, what are we doing? Like what, and also going back to the whole like conservative ideology, like so much of the reform conversation around food has been on the left over the last like couple of decades. And so you have like papers and books and think tanks and, you have all that you have the CSPI reports where you can look at and be like, okay, this is their prescription that they've come up with of like, do added sugars reduction targets or do push sodium reduction, ban certain things. Like they have their prescription, right? But on the right, we don't have any of that. We don't know like what's the Trumpian answer if you believe and take in good faith that RFK and all of his people believe we are being poisoned. I mean, they are identifying real health concerns. Like, then what is the response? And I think that's what's so kind of disorienting about this moment is like, we don't really know, especially when you're shrinking government and you're in a deregulatory position, what then are the tools? One of the things they're doing, which is kind of interesting, is HHS has a RFP out. I think it might have closed, seeking like a PR campaign, a multi-million-dollar PR campaign to try to convince the public to cut back on processed foods, tying it to diabetes concerns specifically. I think it may also include something about wearables, which is questionable in terms of the evidence there. But, and we haven't seen a lot of that from the government. Like, nobody knows about MyPlate. Nobody knows about FDA's nutrition resources. Like, even as a reporter, I wouldn't know about them. They're not marketed well. They don't put money behind. They don't have money to put behind those resources. And so going back to the vibes thing, I think we could see more messaging type things happen. Not everyone's going to agree with those messages, but that in and of itself is different. Like, it's not regulatory, but it's different to like try to use that government megaphone. And it is coming, a lot of it, from a lack of trust, like in institutions broadly, not just government. But I mean, they're angry about higher ed. They're angry about journalism. I mean, every institution is being kind of torn down right now, all across the board. Yeah.
You bring up a good point. Is there... So, when I was in government, we used to say like FDA thrived under conservative administrations because like they kind of just said, don't overregulate and we'll just let you do what you do.
We don't care.
Right. Yeah. This feels like
very different
and very, well, I'm not saying this feels, it is very almost more hands-on than you would see even in typically a liberal administration where they're, it's expected that they're going to be micromanaging aspects of the health of the populace. How does that jive? Do we have an historical antecedent that we can reference that's like similar, where it just feels like, again, anachronistic to current sort of conservative approaches in food policy and health? But why is it happening this way?
I don't think there is a historical comparison. And I mean, over time also, we've sort of seen, it's not completely linear, but I think over time, generally, the administrations try to get more control of the agencies, right? Like, reporters used to be able to roam the halls of these places. Like that I think started to go away during like Bush too. Like, we've had over time less openness, more control from the top, like messaging, everything going through OMB, even guidance or smaller things. Everyone kind of hates OMB in the government because it's like God, right? Like, who gave OMB all this power? So I think there's been that general trend. I can't think of certainly no Republican administration I've followed or studied there would be no comparison there. This is a unique mix of being a deregulatory administration, wanting to cut government. We've seen all the DOGE stuff, the reductions in force. Just recently, USDA announced they're trying to move out of DC, which would almost certainly result in a massive, they're saying they're not cutting staff, but like a lot of staff will not move. Yeah. We saw what happened with ERS. Most staff left when they moved it to Kansas City. So the Economic Research Service, I should say, USDA's research arm. And so there's a lot of disruption, right? There's a lot of that. But then you have the rhetoric saying we're being poisoned. And that then, I think, requires a response. Like, they have sold this to the public as we're going to do something about this. And yet they're sometimes saying things like, oh, we're not going to do like a European nanny state. Sometimes that comes out. I don't know that Kennedy has said that specifically, but I know Callie Means, one of his top advisors, has. And that's such an interesting statement, because what I hear coming from a lot of the MAHA, like moms and activists and sort of people on Instagram and whatever, is kind of like, actually, they do sort of want a European regulatory state. I don't think they would call it a nanny state. Like, they're like, why doesn't Europe use X additive?
Yeah.
Why don't they have this, they don't allow this pesticide or herbicide? Like, you see parents going, if there's any question anywhere, why are we using it? Right. And it really is a precaution. That's a precautionary like mindset or framework. And that has traditionally not had any place in not just the American regulatory system, really, but certainly not the Republican side, which has tended to be more small government. Like, we want to get these innovations to market. We want to, you know what I mean? We don't want to be this barrier. Like, the fact that we've sort of, I think, American industry has taken a lot of pride in, like, we have products that Europe can't use, right? Like, there's another side to that. So it's just a really hard, like, how do you thread that needle? Like, you've gotten all of these voters like fired up about this stuff. And then again, like, what is the policy answer, I think, is the big, big question.
I mean, Helena and I talk about this a lot on Forked, which is the difficulty faced by the good faith actors potentially within the Trump administration, where you have a population and a base that has very strong views about what government should do, which is what you were just talking about, and the traditional and continuing view by the people in power in the administration that the government should not be doing anything, right? So that's a constant theme.
There's a contradiction there.
Within the first few months of the Trump administration. But it also brings up another, what I think is a pretty interesting political question. When you look at, I don't know, the regulations on, I think the best example is the artificial dye movement, whether that's bully pulpit stuff from DC or West Virginia changing the rules for the rest of the country, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. Why didn't Democrats have the ability to get this done? Right? I'm a yoga guy, and I go into my yoga studio, and on the wall there, to my surprise, is an ad for Callie Means's company. What is it, TrueMed? So I'm afraid to ask the people running it, are they actually kind of like RFK Jr.? I don't want to know. But the fact is, many of the things in this weird moment overlap, right, between the bougie folks in my neighborhood in Brooklyn and those dudes out in the middle of the country who were so mad at everything happening in DC. Yeah. And you just keep coming back to the fact of, like, some of these things are okay, and they didn't happen under Democratic administrations.
I mean, I think that is a point that is not made enough. This stuff is so popular. And by this stuff, I mean the food stuff. Okay, so if you look at the polling on getting rid of synthetic dyes, getting rid of some additives, even regulating pesticides more, things like banning ultra-processed foods from school meals, which would be radically different from where we are. And you could argue, okay, people don't understand what UPFs are, but I think they sort of do in the concept of it, which is like they know what a things that are really processed, right?
Yeah.
So
small plug.
Banning,
I'm doing a whole series on
I'm excited.
Foods.
I love that you're doing this, because it is complicated. It is complicated.
It's very complicated. So it's very complicated.
So those things, banning ultra-processed foods, regulating pesticides more, getting rid of synthetic dyes, those types of policies, from what we've seen, poll at like 70-30 on both sides, Republicans and Democrats.
Which is
maybe
is insane for if you don't follow polls. That's very high.
It's hard for me to think of another issue where you're seeing that kind of agreement. Things like mandating nutrition education in publicly funded medical schools is like 80% supported on both sides. This stuff is popular. And so and FDA has always operated in a do we have, they're super conservative in the approach and the I've written a lot about the lengthy timelines of FDA, and they will look at evidence, but it has never, to my knowledge, been a populist-driven agency. Like, what is popular? Is this thing, and I think we're kind of seeing that clash right now. Like, They haven't gone through a regulatory process. FDA has not laid out all of the evidence they have to ban synthetic dyes. They haven't banned anything. They have asked the food industry to remove them, in part because it is popular. I mean, they are concerned about the health, their concerns. There are some studies showing that some children in particular who have ADHD can have behavioral effects on some of these dyes. I mean, there are some studies out there that do raise concerns about carcinogenic. I mean, but it's FDA has always reaffirmed that, like, looking at the whole slate of evidence, these are still okay. And the agency has said that until we got this new crew. And so now what, right? Like the dyes are going away. The dyes are going away. Like,
but it's not just now what, isn't it, Helena? It's why, what are people supposed to make of this idea that the purportedly competent, purportedly progressive, purportedly technocratic administrations that preceded Trump, they couldn't use they couldn't use public pressure. They couldn't work again. They couldn't push back on these companies, and they keep calling it. They're right. It is science. Science works slowly, but politics is not science, right? There are very, very important questions politically that the party that is now out of power needs to be asking itself why it allowed these things to get so far without taking action. And because it puts you in this position of saying, well, it's the clock stopped, stop clock is right twice a day thing with RFK Jr. I don't agree with RFK Jr. on things, but some of those things I do agree with him on. And that is less a problem for RFK Jr. and more a problem for, like, I don't know, Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah.
I agree. There's an interesting thing with science. The position of power comes from saying I don't know. That is, it's part of your training to be very like okay and comfortable.
Bros don't say that though.
No, but also politics and in policy. When I was like, I don't know is a death knell. You are not allowed to not know the answer to something in politics, in my opinion. And so there's an inherent tension that's set up where science has to proceed through its I don't knows until it gets to a consensus or at least some base reality. But that, as you said, Theodore, it takes time. And I also think, going back to your point around the nanny state sort of issue, I do think it's the administration has an agenda, or like the things they'd like to see happen, and then they're like, we'll just like let them go, it'll happen. We'll force industry will ask them. But the MAHA moms and what have you want to see it enacted. They want to force that agenda on everyone, and so they're they want the administration to enforce this, which is against, I think, some of their actions typically. And so that, I think, partially at least explains in my mind that contradiction that they're in. I had a question though, sort of related to are we seeing sort of equal time paid to things like that typically be more conservative friendly, like USDA and FDA in terms of food policy? Does USDA getting off the hook a little bit more? If you have any thoughts on that, Theodore, I don't know if you know anything.
That, I think that's a good question, but I think that's more of a Helena question. I mean, I could speculate, but I think it would be better if Helena grabbed that one.
See, saying I don't know is a position of strength.
Well, I didn't just say I don't know. I did what the politicians do. I passed the buck.
That's right. That's right. No, so it is a good question. I think, like, if you were to rank, like, what are the most MAHA agencies to the least MAHA in terms of, like, their rhetoric, the pressure on them and everything, HHS definitely most MAHA, FDA pretty close up there in terms of rhetoric. Again, nothing in the Federal Register, but rhetoric there. And they've announced some intentions, like they want to close the so-called grass loophole. They want to reform how that system works. We'll see. I think there may end up being some legislation in Congress that deals with that. It's something I'm trying to figure out right now. So that's an intention, right? Then USDA would come a ways down from that. Brooke Rollins, the agriculture secretary, seems to be trying to walk a very fine line. She calls herself a MAHA mom. She is right there, locked arms, does a lot of events with Secretary Kennedy. They really present themselves as partners and friends. And yet the mission of USDA is to promote U.S. agriculture. So when Kennedy has been out there raising concerns about commonly used herbicides like glyphosate or other inputs, like the agriculture industry has lost its mind and pushed back really, really hard. And so far, and she doesn't, regulate those products. That's EPA. EPA would be way down at the bottom, definitely least MAHA agency. That agency is like saying they're going to, approve more pesticides. They're deregulating. They're cutting like some of the PFAS standards we've had. They're cutting all sorts of environmental regulations that you could kind of draw a straight line to in terms of like more contaminants ending up in the environment and the food supply and the water. And, so there's a lot of tension over EPA, but that's kind of like how I see them in terms of like pressure and also pressure, attention, and sort of the degree to which they are adopting the MAHA
Could I just say though, this is very
rhetoric.
much grading on a curve here, right? The idea, one of the things that if you're Brooke Rollins, that I think you want the public perception to be is you're serving sort of two masters, one much bigger than the other. I think the one master is Donald Trump, right? So if you're,
that's an all-in audience of one, yeah,
absolutely. So she's serving him, and so when in doubt, cut the staff, move the offices to the middle of the country, and you have met that mandate from Donald Trump. On the other hand, the public is not sure what, the public, she wants to be perceived as one of the more moderate members of the Trump administration. But it's hard to really tell what that means and if that's the case, right? On the one hand, if moderate means not really attacking the system of commodity subsidies that underpins the agricultural system in the country, then I guess she is a moderate, but I don't know what the heck that means, right? Like if the
well, it's interesting because usually conservatives hate the farm subsidies. So
exactly. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't add up. The big beautiful act did what Republicans like. It cut SNAP. They got that done. But on the other hand, it kept sending the subsidies to the corn and soybean
increased
growers
them by $66 billion. Yeah.
Is that moderate? Is that not moderate? Is that for Trump? Is that for the Republican base? I don't know that I don't know that math adds up.
Well, I on that note, USDA is definitely sticking to, when they talk about anything MAHA related, it's always SNAP and SNAP restrictions, and that's about it. Like I've repeatedly asked Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy, okay, you've Kennedy has actually said he believes the school meals program is poisoning children. The food in the school meals program, which, is probably about $24 billion in spending from USDA, not under him, but, bold claim, like to say that, right? That's a government program that they could change the rules for. And so I've asked them, like, you've made these statements. Are you planning to change the rules? And they'll talk about the dietary guidelines. They're going to change the dietary guidelines. Okay, well, the dietary guidelines eventually flow into these programs. But if you just look at an issue like added sugar, the dietary guidelines have since 2015 said that we need to limit added sugar consumption. That was a new thing, to peel off added sugar from total sugar. And yet we didn't get a sugar limit at all for school meals till this year. So a decade, right? And so if that's their position, that this program needs reformed, I keep asking, are you going to change the rules? Are you going to update the regulation? That is what governs this program, and they just dodge that hard. And I don't know if it's that they're still deciding, like, what are they going to try to do in the next 3 years, but can't get an answer on that. And that's a good example of where, we just don't know. The SNAP restrictions thing is a really safe place politically to be, because you don't have to go up against the agriculture folks. They're not really going to fight. I mean, they don't like the idea of blocking certain foods from SNAP, but they're not really going to go to the mat over that. Right. And it really then narrows it down to the only real opponents to that are, the retailers really don't like it because it's complicated, and they don't want their checkers to be at the, policing it, to be like, sorry, you can't have this sugary drink here. You can't buy this with your EBT. Oh, I know in the state next door you can, but you can't here. I mean, there is some administrative that the retailers don't like it, but it politically collapses it down to retailers, the sugary drink manufacturers, and candy. That's your opponent. Well, this administration doesn't care about that. They're like, whatever. We're racking up MAHA wins at USDA by saying, by supporting this. And it does, a lot of conservatives do support it. Traditionally, a lot of liberals supported it. I mean, that's changed with the groups. Most of the advocacy groups do not support it. They think it's paternalistic, and it, can increase stigma in the SNAP program. There's a lot of opposition now, but I think that's like the easiest place for USDA to engage on MAHA. And that's what we're seeing so far, but we don't know if they're going to go into other things. They could change government procurement rules. They could massively increase messaging on nutrition. They could spend more money. There's a lot of things. You could revamp WIC again. There's plenty of levers they have, but we just don't know.
So let's wrap up on just a topic of, do we have enough staff? Do we have enough money? Are they, I mean, it's a basic question. Do we have enough resources? And it sounds like that they continue to reduce the workforce, but also in some cases asking for more money.
I think that's a really interesting point, right? And I don't think it's just about, things like USDA or FDA. We've seen cuts across the government, and it's sort of like the reporting on tariffs, right? Every day I'm doom scrolling through the New York Times when I get up in the morning, and it's like, well, so far there haven't been major changes in the economy due to the tariffs, but economists continue to believe that it's coming, right? Although you go to the store, the prices do seem like they're up. I mean, when I'm buying stuff, it's a little more expensive than
they're way up.
So I think it's the same kind of thing with the cuts across the government, where it's not like the government is going to collapse tomorrow. You're still going to be able to get some of the basic services that you need from the government. But if there's an emergency and you want to call FEMA, it ain't going to go so well. The problem is, and again, it's a political problem as well as a governance problem, is that those organizations, as far as their public-facing aspects were, before the Trump administration, they weren't working that well already. We're talking about a process of regulatory capture and cutbacks from both parties over 30 years. The services that the government provides are already not that great in many ways, even though they're still vital, and it doesn't mean that you need to get rid of them. So when Helena, when you can actually answer the question that was posed, it's there, but it's not that easy to discern, because it was already functioning very poorly.
Yeah, I think looking at FDA's foods program is a great example of this. Like they did a riff across HHS, and that inadvertently, I think, swept up a lot of foods program staff. I think, probably a couple hundred. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you've looked at the foods program, like they didn't have a couple hundred people to lose.
That's right.
And it was already I think it's just objectively true that the foods program at FDA in particular did not have the people, probably has never had the staff that matches the mandate they have, which is to safeguard the food safety for 80% of the food supply, and then also do all the nutrition work. And there's additives, veterinary drug, there's so much in there, although I guess technically that's not part of the human foods program, which is sort of a separate debate. But they did not have the resources to begin with. And it's interesting to see that even with the Trump administration trying to cut, and in some cases succeeding in cutting a lot of these programs, they have actually, in this most recent budget, the White House has asked for more money for FDA's foods program to try to staff up to do things like reviewing more chemicals or food chemicals that are already on the market, which FDA has traditionally not had the resources to do. And I think consumers assume that is already happening. Like if you were to ask, like, are we, actively monitoring like food chemicals on the market and like, having more of a post-market system, I think if you were to ask a lot of people that, they would just assume that was happening. And you need people to do that. Like you need people to pull, even if they want to pull some chemicals from the market or crack down in any meaningful way. Like you need staff to do that. You need to review the science. You need to put it, we keep talking about the Federal Register, like you need to go through all of those motions to do that. And it requires people. And I think seeing even the Trump administration acknowledge that there are not enough people in the FDA foods program, which I've done a lot of reporting on, is kind of a big deal. Yet we don't know if Congress is going to give them more money, and they already cut the foods program. Like, the entire comm staff was cut. I, up until yesterday, didn't even know who to email over there. And, I'm probably one of a handful of reporters who actually focuses a lot on the foods program at FDA. Everything had to get routed through a contact form at HHS. And it was sort of like sending your inquiry into a unknown,
into the void.
Into the void. Yeah.
That might be the title of this episode.
And they do reply in the deadline, which I appreciate, but they don't really answer. They don't really get into the substantive answers to the questions, which is one thing that FDA was always slow out, but would answer questions in a substantive way. And they, would have to route it through subject matter experts within the agency. Like there was this whole, it was a lot of work. So they have already hobbled some of the capabilities. Like that's just true. And yet they are at the same time trying to say, oh, we need to do more. We need to, like, I think it's clear with MAHA, they have sold the idea that they are going to do more to tackle additives and nutrition and whatever. And like, you need people to do that. So we're starting to see some of that realization, but it is still early. We're 6 months in. We have 3.5 more years to go. And so I think in the next 6 months, we'll have an even more clear idea of like what they're actually going to do here.
Well, I want to thank you both, Theodore Ross, Editor-in-Chief of Food Environment Reporting Network, and my good friend, Helena Bottemiller Evich, founder of Food Fix, together hosting their new podcast, Forked. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. I want to thank you both for coming on to just give us an update on what's happening in food policy here in the United States and what we can look forward to and give us the color that we needed. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It was great.
You can reach out to both Theodore and Helena in the show notes below, and you will see you next time on the next Food Truths podcast.